السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. أما بعد. So we are picking up where we left off last time in the journey of the story of Musa alayhi salam. We spoke about the where the army had reached Musa alayhi salam and his people at the Red Sea and crossing over to the other side. And then we spoke about the sunnah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that established in this earth that the al-aqibatu lil-muttaqeen, right? The good ending is the one who has taqwa. And today, inshallah, we are gonna start from when they had passed from the other side of the Red Sea to Sinai, right? When they reached the other side, what is it that happened, right? So what happened to Bani Israel essentially right after they were rescued and saved by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through an obvious miracle, right? That showed the support of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to the Prophet Musa alayhi salam and to Bani Israel to save them, right? So what happened is that when we reached the other side. Now, one of the interesting things or interesting verses that mentions what happened immediately after they had crossed to the other side, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned that they had passed by a group of people, right? A group of individuals. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَجَاوَزْنَا بِبَنِي إِسْرَائِيلَ الْبَحْرِ فَأَتَوْا عَلَى قَوْمٍ يَعْكِفُونَ عَلى أَصْنَامٍ لَهُمْ. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَجَاوَزْنَا بِبَنِي إِسْرَائِيل, which means we took Bani Israel across to the other side, they can cross the other side from the ocean or the sea, and they came upon a group of people. أَتَوْا عَلَى قَوْمٍ يَعْكِفُونَ عَلى أَصْنَامٍ لَهُمْ. So these group of people, what they were doing is they were doing عُكُوف. عُكُوف, which means to remain, right? The word i'tikaf, when you do i'tikaf, it means to remain in a specific area, a specific place for an act of worship. And so these individuals were sitting there, their intent in devotion to some idols that they have. And it's mentioned in some of the books of tafsir that these were the Kan'aniyun, right? The Canaanites. I don't know if you guys, anybody here interested in history? Type. The Canaanites, right? They were that group of people. In some called them al-Amaliqa, right? The giants. Later on, anthropologists or historians, they said these were the Phoenicians, the Phoenicians, right? The Phoenicians were that area where it's between, in that group of area. So their tribe used to extend from Sinai all the way to, modern day Jordan and those areas. So they kind of inhabited that area. And so what we know, obviously, is that these individuals were idol worshippers, right? Now, what is interesting is the request that happened at that moment from Bani Israel to Prophet Musa alayhi salam. What I mean by interesting is that this is a very strange request that they made, from different dimensions. Like the request itself was weird, the timing of that request was weird, and whom they're requesting it from was also very strange and odd. And so the request was, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned, they said, قالوا يا موسى اجعل لنا إلها كما لهم كما اجعل لنا إلها كما اجعل لنا إلها كما لهم كما I forgot the verse. اللهم اجعل لنا إلها كما لهم آلهة, right? كما لهم آلهة قال إنكم قوم تجهلون, right? So Musa alayhi salam, so they asked Musa, they said, "Oh Musa, right? Make for us a God, اجعل لنا آلهة, a deity, just as they have a deity." Now remember, these are Bani Israel. They're supposed to be believers. They understand Tawheed. The entire circumstance of that, that request, it by all means is just the strangest and the most oddest of requests, right? Once again, whether it is the request itself or the timing of the request or from who it's asking, right? Who they're asking it from. And so if you look at these things, we look at, they're asking, okay, so they're asking, what are they asking? They're asking, the timing of it is they asked for an idol, for a God to be worshipped, right after Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saved them through a miracle, right? After they have witnessed, the miracles of the flood, the miracle of the drought, the miracle of the blood, the locusts, You name it. They've seen so many things, right? And yet, right after Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saved them, they said, give us an idol, right? Let alone the act, the question itself, or the request itself, is the strangest request because they know definitely that there is no God but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why are they asking for an idol to worship? But even, what makes things even worse, so this is one layer over another, right? Who are they asking it from? They're asking it from Musa alayhi salam, the one that has dedicated his life to the tawheed of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that sacrificed so much, right, for the tawheed of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that started drilling into his people the whole aspect of tawheed and depending on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How would they expect that a prophet of Allah would create an idol for them, right? By all means, let me put this in perspective, right? If a person, right, if a person is telling his son, don't drink alcohol, right? Alcohol is bad. I prohibit you from drinking alcohol. And then that son turns around and asks his father to buy him alcohol, right? The least of it, we would consider that request as something that is insulting or disrespectful, right? It's an insult to the father. It's an insult to a lot of things, right? Let alone you'd ask, But it also says something about the person who requests, that this person does not have shame. That this person does not have shame. In Arabic, the better word to use is haya, right? This individual does not have any haya in what they're requesting. Like flat out, it's not just like a sin or a major sin. This is the sin that destroys everything else, right? The sin that is it's the unforgivable sin when you ask to worship other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. These individuals requested that, right? But what it does is it shows us or it tells us or gives us an insight of the nature of Bani Israel, right? And I guess this is one of the things we can look at this. This is something that perhaps the Bani Israel, something that was, subhanAllah, part of their characteristic, part of their manner. Every group of people, or at least every individual, they have certain characteristics. But generally speaking, some nations and groups of people and populations, they tend to have specific characteristics that propagate among them and spread among them. And so Bani Israel, one thing it points about them over here is their nature to retaliate, right? To retaliate against orders, rules, and regulations from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If something doesn't sit well with them, they will retaliate against it. And we see that throughout their history interaction with other prophets. This was an example with Musa alayhi salam, right? The whole retaliation, we're talking about after Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saved them, right? They're supposed to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, express gratitude towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There comes that retaliation. You know what? We feel like worshiping something else, right? Yeah, give us something else, right? And so it's not surprising then, later on when we hear of how Bani Israel, for example, would directly disobey the order of Musa alayhi salam to do specific things, or their ability to write off, kill other messengers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this was mentioned in the Quran, right? أو كلما جاءكم رسول بما لا تهوى أنفسكم فريقا كذبتم وفريقا تقتلون. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَكُلَّمَا, right, is that when every time a messenger comes to you with something that you don't desire, that doesn't go along with your desire, one group you called a liar and you disbelieved in them, and another group you killed, right? Bani Israel were known to do that. In fact, unfortunately, even until this day, I kind of saw one of the most interesting clips. It was a person who was obviously Jewish, was in an argument with a Christian. And he flat out told him, we're the ones that killed Jesus, right? No problems, right? Just flat out. And I was kind of shocked. I thought people would be very careful when they're being filmed. But flat out, he said, we're the ones that killed Jesus, right? We killed your messenger, or whatever the case is. But this speaks of that whole nature of retaliation. And so this talks about specific natures of individuals. But remember, the whole purpose, when we look at the previous nations, is that so we'd learn and not... we would learn from their mistakes, but also from their successes. Whatever was good, we implement. Whatever was bad, we be careful. We take heed of it. And the companions ﷺ did this, right? When the Prophet ﷺ at the battle, before the battle of Badr, when he was taking the opinion of the companions, radiallahu anhum, specifically the Ansar. He was not talking to the Muhajirin. He knows the Muhajirin are willing to sacrifice their life for the Prophet ﷺ because they already did their hijrah. But when the Prophet ﷺ had moved to Medina, he had taken an oath or a covenant from the inhabitants or Muslims in Medina that they would protect the Prophet ﷺ from what they protect themselves in Medina. This was happening outside. And so the Prophet ﷺ was seeking their kind of approval, but he was asking the opinion, what should we do? And so when the Ansar realized this, they said something interesting. They said, Ya Rasulullah, O Messenger of Allah, we will not say to you similar to what Bani Israel said to Musa. They told him, اذهب أنت وربك فقاتلا. They said, go you and your Lord and fight. إنها هنا قاعدون. We are here going to stay. They said, we will never say something like that. So they know that, that this is something that is wrong. They learned from that. But rather what they said بل نقول اذهب ونحن معك نقاتل, right? Go and we will fight with you. Even if you cross the ocean, we will follow you, right? But this is where we kind of learn from these things. But once again, the nature of the retaliation of Bani Israel. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ended this section of this verse by how Musa alayhi salam responded to them. He said, إِنَّكُمْ قَوْمٌ تَجْهَلُونَ. Right? He said, you are indeed people who are behaving ignorantly, right? Or you are people who are ignorant. Now, some of the I've read this somewhere, and it's a really beautiful kind of they say lefta, like a take on what is happening. If you look at Bani Israel in Egypt, did they have problems worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Did they have problems? Did they worship other than Allah? No, right? But the minute they crossed to new lands, saw new cultures, new people, what happened? What happened? They requested to worship an idol. What caused that change, right? This is what I'm talking about. And so the commentary was, they said it seems that sometimes the allure of new places, right? The allure of a new place, or the deception, or the what do they call it? Bariq. What's the word? How do you translate bariq in English? The shiny new thing, right? When something is new and shiny, it can make a person deviate from the truth. It can be a source of fitna for them, a tribulation, right? And so when they see new things, new places, they get mesmerized by them, and they want to share some of what's happening, even if it is wrong, right? And we see that does sometimes happen, subhanAllah, as human beings, it might affect us. So when we go from one place to another, you see, subhanAllah, sometimes some individuals, they tend to act a bit more loosely or carelessly with the Islamic regulations and rules. For whatever reason, just whether it's the company that they're in or the environment that they're in, it does affect them. But it's a warning of how sometimes these new places can affect us. Yes?
The irony is, this is very ironic. When they were under oppression, they were worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When they were set up free, they want to worship idols. Isn't it ironic?
It is subhanAllah ironic. But we see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned this in the Quran quite often from the people of, they're not sincere to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. لَإِنَّ نَجَّانَ مِنَ الْبَحْرِ لَنَكُونَنَّ مِنَ الشَّاكِرِينَ. Right? If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saved us from the storm, we will be from the grateful. But the minute He saved them, they went back to worshipping the idols. Rather than thanking Allah, they thank their idols. طيب. But the whole point of it is that how the worlds of other individuals or the other societies, when we see them for the first time, or that environment that we walk into that is new, can actually affect us, can affect our belief system, can affect our behavior. And this is why it's very important for us to be careful of these things, right? Sometimes, subhanAllah, there's you sense this little pressure or vibe, or it's weird sometimes. But part of that is tightly connected to إِنَّكُمْ قَوْمٌ تَجْهَلُونَ. There's ignorance, right? And this is the other point we can talk about this over here, is when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when Musa alayhi salam described ignorance, it points to us the danger of ignorance, right? Ignorance can slowly, step by step, lead an individual to become a person who is completely engorge and indulging in sin, or even sometimes they can leave their religion out of ignorance, right? And this is something that's very dangerous, because with ignorance, misconceptions easily slide in, and we easily adopt them. Right? That's why they're called misconceptions. It's wrong concepts. But we will never figure out that it's a wrong concept unless we have knowledge. Right? The only solution to misconceptions is knowledge. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala kind of pointing out over here is that how easy it is for people to move away from the correct path out of ignorance, or because they're ignorant. Right? And this is why in Islam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had, encourages so many times in the verses of the Quran to reflect, to contemplate. And the many hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam encourages to seek knowledge, or even the reward associated with knowledge. And the Quran itself, it talks about how, people with knowledge are higher in rank, right, than other individuals. Right? Because this is something that is an important factor. Because with the more knowledge we have, the more deeply rooted we become. No matter where we are, we're still deeply rooted, right? And this is why it's imperative for us as a Muslim ummah to rise and elevate above the level of knowledge that we have. We need to, right? We have to. Unfortunately, the reality is our knowledge of Islam as a population is like an elementary level of knowledge. I'm talking about as a whole, as Muslims, as a Muslim ummah, our knowledge is like a 3rd, 4th grade level of Islamic studies. Yes? It's Iqra. And if we understand that, we'll understand, why is it one of the first things that any colonizing country, the first thing it does is it messes around with the curriculum, the education system. Completely messes. There's a purpose, because with that knowledge, you create, knowledge is power, right? When you have knowledge, it turns into a belief system. When a person believes something, it's very difficult to control them. It's very difficult to pass your own agenda along them. And so one of the first things they do is they completely annihilate the Islamic, whatever, just the entire curriculum, sometimes even eliminating the Arabic language, right? The French are notorious for this. The first thing they do when they colonize, Sheikh, you should know this, right? Algeria, the first thing they did is what? Killed the scholars. The Arabic language was prohibited. French would be learned in the curriculum, and they adjusted everything, right?
What they used to do, my parents used to tell me, they will just teach you French. Once you start talking French, they get you out of school. That's it.
You no more education. Yes, I know, no more education, right? And you can throw out into a history, right? Now, even in Muslim countries, unfortunately, what happened was, this was unfortunately intentional. They detracted from the status of Islamic knowledge, and they glorified and moved up secular knowledge, right? And so as a Muslim population right now, the most important thing for everybody is what? For your children, is to make sure that they have a good education. What education are we talking about? Secular education. It's not Islamic education. Now, once again, by the way, don't get me wrong, I'm not belittling of secular education. Secular education is important, right? But there's a minimum level of Islamic education that we need to have. And the interesting thing is, nowadays, it's the one that has, at least in the Arabic Muslim countries, the ones that don't meet the cutoff to med school, to engineering, to dentistry, to all these schools, the one with the lower average, guess where they go? Madrasa. This is a disaster, because essentially you are creating a generation of people who are not intellectually capable of understanding the intricacies of Islam. Do you know in the past what they used to do? You know in the madrasa in the past, what they used to do is they take the kids, right, and they teach them math, Arabic, memorization of the Quran, right, a little bit of fiqh and aqeedah. They'll teach them all this, all together. And then the smart ones, they'll take to further educate Islamically and teach them how to become scholars. The ones that failed go to med school, go to all the other, all the other disciplines, physics. I promise, wallahi, this is what it used to be. I'm not joking. They would take the smart ones, and those will become the scholars of Islam, right? The other ones that didn't make a cutoff, that's the secular education for you. Alhamdulillah, you got your like your furud, like the mandatory knowledge that you need to become a Muslim, from like belief system to fiqh to everything else. Use now your whatever you're good for to betterment the rest of the ummah, because we do need the doctors, we do need the engineers, we need the kids, but those smart ones, we need them for something else, right? Because when a like when a new contemporary issue happens, we need that intelligence to look into the evidence of Sharia and deduce the correct rulings. It's not something that is easy. This is why you need that level, right? But subhanAllah, nowadays things, but I'm pointing this out why, is because we understand now knowledge is so, like, it's important for us. The only way this ummah got defeated is when we intellectually got defeated. We never got defeated, like, through war or battle or being overpowered by any of those things. It doesn't matter. But the minute that we lost our intellectual, status, this is where we really kind of lost our, our place in the ummah. And so we have to kind of bring that back again, right? Like, it's important for us to, invest in our future generations, right? Umar, he's gone, huh? Like, it's important for us to invest in them, create the curriculum for them at a level that is way above third grade level. Like, I'm talking about advanced level. Like, by the time they reach high school, they should be able to debate atheists. They should be able to know the proofs of the existence of Allah is 1, 2, 3, right? The proofs of prophethood is 1, 2, 3. Why is Christianity false? 1, 2, 3, right? Why is atheist illogical? 1, 2, 3. That's the level I'm talking about. This is a level where the majority of adults cannot even discuss, right? This is the minimum level now. I'm not talking about, forget about beyond that. This is the minimum level we have to invest in. It's what protects us, right? With ignorance, we move away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. With ignorance, it can lead us to those disasters, those weird requests that we make, to break the boundaries of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to go into the haram, right? And this comes from إِنَّكُمْ قَوْمٌ تَجْهَلُونَ, right? You're ignorant. طيب. Now, one thing about the how the Bani Israel behaved, right? They went from believing in submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tawheed to wanting to worship idols. It pointed to another characteristic that they have, which is their their indecisiveness. They fluctuate from one state to another. Some mufassirin, they said they believe in the morning and then they disbelieve in the evening. The reason behind it is because Iman did not infiltrate their heart. Iman did not infiltrate their heart. SubhanAllah, by the way, it's by coincidence. The verse that I recited in Surah Al-Hujurat, قالت الأعراب آمنا, right? The Arabs that came and they entered Islam, they said, we have Iman. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told them, قُلْ لَمْ تُؤْمِنُوا وَلَكِنْ قُولُوا أَسْلَمْنَا وَلَمَّا يَدْخُلِ الْإِيمَانُ فِي قُلُوبِكُمْ. Don't say we're believers, say we submitted. And Iman has not yet infiltrated your hearts. It is when Iman infiltrates a person's heart, this is when they are completely, their heart shines, is filled with Iman. This is when it becomes strong. This is when they become the likes of the sorcerers of Fir'aun, they're willing to stand up to a person like Fir'aun, even though if he's meant death. To become like Asiyah, radiallahu anha, right? Who stood up against Fir'aun, to become like the Mashita. It will cause us to be able to withstand the toughest situations with courage, right? Without wavering, right? And the following, إنما المؤمنون الذين آمنوا بالله, the first Surah Al-Hujurat, إنما المؤمنون الذين آمنوا بالله ورسوله ثم لم يرتابوا. Truly the ones who believed, so this is Surah Al-Hujurat also, the ones who believed are the ones that believed in Allah and His Messenger, and they did not have that hesitation, right? It's not. They have complete resolve, complete Iman, and this is something that tells us this is also something that we have to work on. We have to, as much as we can, constantly increase our Iman, right? The yaqeen comes in different levels. We want to move from the minimum level to the next, inshallah, right? From the ilm al-yaqeen to ayn al-yaqeen, for example, right? From having that knowledge, iman, yaqeen based on knowledge, because we're learning, that's education, right? To experiencing it, right? Experiencing iman is a completely different level. Experiencing this is a different certainty. When you start tasting that sweetness, right, of your worship, that closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Once you do that, the minute you lose it, you're you go frantic, right? You're like, I need this, and okay, you look around, what am I sinning? Is there something wrong that I'm doing? Is there a shortcoming? Okay, how can I increase? SubhanAllah, you become a different individual. Your focus entirely becomes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And this is how the power of knowledge moves you from one situation to another, from the situation where you're indecisive to you're firm. You have that resolve, that yaqeen. طيب. Um, Now, one interesting thing I want to mention is as we look at that verse, one thing we can look at is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described Bani Israel, right? And once again, these are things that I'm pointing out. It's not a form of discrimination, right? So that people don't think we're being discriminated. No, it's lessons from the past, and it's the nature of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes certain people so that we learn from it. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this verse, and actually in the entire Quran, He described Bani Israel in many different traits. But in this one over here, I want to mention about 5 things that were mentioned, okay? So that we would learn from them. 1, that they're ungrateful. Juhud, ungrateful. 2, ignorance. We already talked about, we're going to talk about more. 3, they're leaning towards materialism. I'm going to explain that in a little bit. The 4th, they're them being followers as opposed to leaders. It's called taba'iyya, right? Their willingness to be followers as opposed to leaders. And the last one is their sense of feeling that they are always oppressed or weak. Shu'ur bil-da'f, right? Feeling that they are weak. So we yes. At that time. Yeah, Sheikh, at that time. Because they were the Muslims at that time. Everybody else wasn't. فَفَضَّلْنَا عَلَى الْعَالَمِينَ. So for that time. No, they're not first muwahideen, ya Sheikh. No. They're not the first muwahideen. But they, No. عندك قوم نوح, right? The ones who believed with him, كانوا موحدين. Before that, Adam alayhi salam and all his generations, the majority of them were muwahideen. So no, there was always Islam on earth. But it's just that when it deviated so much, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would send messengers. That's why the first messenger was Nuh alayhi salam. Right? فَضَّلْنَاكُمْ عَلَى الْعَالَمِينَ فِي ذَلِكَ الْوَقْتِ. Of that time. Because of that time, they were the Muslims. Everybody else were idol worshippers. Right? طيب. والله سبحانه وتعالى said وجاوزنا بني إسرائيل البحر فأتوا على قوم يعكفون على أصنام لهم قالوا يا موسى اجعل لنا إلها كما لهم آلهة قال إنكم قوم تجهلون إن هؤلاء متبر ما هم فيه وباطل ما كانوا يعملون قال أغير الله أبغيكم إلها وهو فضلكم على العالمين. And so I'm going to translate the meaning of this verse quickly. Is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, and I mentioned, we mentioned this earlier, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had crossed with Bani Israel to the other side of the ocean, and they came upon a group of people who were worshipping idols, and so they asked Musa, they said, give us an idol like they have idol. He said, إنكم قوم تجهلون. And then he said, those people who are idol worshippers, متبر ما هم فيه وباطل, which means that those worshippers is destroyed, is that which they are engaged in, right? That this is a form of, that it's like whatever is going to result in their destruction, and worthless whatever they are doing, right? And then he said, alayhi salam, Musa, he said, is there other than Allah I should desire for you as a God, while He has preferred you over the worlds? While He has preferred you over the worlds, which means He made you Muslims, He saved you, that's their preference. طيب. So the first description over here is their ungratefulness, right? So shukr, which is gratitude, the opposite of it is being ungrateful, right? Which in Arabic is called juhud, which is to deny somebody did something, right? It's the opposite of thankfulness. So rather than Bani Israel, rather than they express their gratitude and thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from saving them from Fir'aun, right? From saving them even from drowning, and He had destroyed Fir'aun and his army and saved them, rather than thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and prostrating and worshipping Him, what did they ask? Idol. Right? That is the worst thing, right? That's ungratefulness. Because we understand that worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the right of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Everything we have is from Allah. It is His right. Because that act of worship, an expression of gratefulness, expression of love, an expression of submission, that's what it all entails. And so if we turn around and worship somebody else, that's ungratefulness, right? We ourselves as human beings, we don't like it if we do a favor to somebody and then they turn around and thank somebody else, right? Especially if it's done in public. Jazakumullah khair, brother, this, he did this for me. Even though that brother did nothing, right? He's just trying to kiss up to them for some sort of like, maslaha, right? Benefit. And they ignore the person that really benefited them, right? We don't like that. We call this individual a lot of names, right? Negative things, all of them, most of them, right? But we have to understand this. So the people of Bani Israel, this is their first quality. And so we have to be careful not to be people who are ungrateful, right? Never to use the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in ways that would displease Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's a form of ungratefulness. This is why our scholars, when they describe shukr, part of their description of shukr is to use the blessing of Allah in what pleases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and not to use it in what displeases Him. That includes everything, by the way, that we have. Like our entire body, our entire senses, our wealth, our money, everything, right? We don't utilize that in anything that displeases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but rather use it to get close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave it to us in the first place, right? And so that first characteristic is ungratefulness. Now the second characteristic obviously is ignorance, and we talked about them. Because essentially here's where the ignorance really kind of shines. These idols, right? We're going to create them. Is that right? So they're dependent on us. So why are we worshiping them? Complete ignorance. They're not going to do anything. These idols needed to be created so that they would help us. Just illogical, right? This is where a lot of the ignorance comes in. طيب. The third one I'm going to mention is that they're materialistic, leaning towards materialism. Why did they request that? Why did they want an idol? Like, idol is something that you see and you touch, right? This is what they wanted. We know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not like His creation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not like His creation. And this is what we believe in. Like, there's nothing like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ وَلَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٌ وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْعَلِيمُ. There's nothing in the likeness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and He's all hearing, all seeing, right? So even when you talk about hearing and seeing, we hear and see, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is hearing and seeing is different than ours. We're deficient, we need tools. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is sees all and hears all without any requirement of anything. We get distracted by certain things. Of course, Allah never gets distracted, and so completely a different level, right? The only thing that we understand from those terms is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees all and hears all, right? We never ask anything beyond that because we will never comprehend it, right? We will never comprehend it because we haven't seen. The only way we comprehend things is if we see something or we describe something that we saw something like it, right? That's it. But if we haven't seen Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and there's nothing like Allah, that's it. Our logic will never reach it. But Bani Israel, what do they want? Because they're so leaning towards materialistic, they wanted an idol that they can see and touch, right? Something that is there in front of them. These are individuals that, essentially wanted to worship a creation, right? And this is the deficiency. This is their tendency towards materialistic things. Well, we have to realize that there are certain things that we can never do like that. There are things of the unseen that as believers we believe in, right? We have to believe in those things. طيب. The fourth aspect is them being followers, blind followers, right? So as Muslims, we should never be blind followers. Where were they blind followers? When they said, create a God like they have. Like, I want like this, right? So they're following the idols. Why would they ever follow the idols? Like, if we have what is right, why are we following others? Why aren't we leading? That is a question that we have to understand, right? We have to answer that question. And so they follow others in their belief system, in the way they do things, even though what they have is completely better. Like the idol worshippers, this is something that is humanly created, but what they have is a divine revelation, right? Something from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's uncomparable. You cannot compare them. What they have is what is right, but why are they following it? Now, unfortunately, we have to learn this because as Muslims, we tend to fall into that same trap, right? In our religion, we have all the solutions. Wallahi, we have all the solutions. You know, the economical issues, we have the solution for it, right? The social problems, we have the solution for it. Crime rates, we have the solution for it. Anything that you want to think about, we do have the solution for it. So why do we look somewhere else? Right? Why is all of a sudden the Muslim economy parallels the Western economy? Like our economy is so much powerful, right? The way it's set up, it's a lot powerful. It's more just, right? It allows more good to spread. It allows more independence, right? Like in the whole aspect of riba, right? Riba destroys everything, right? The minute we allowed this in, like the Muslims allowed it into their country and their system, it destroyed everything. Other than the fact, of course, it's haram. But generally speaking, we don't have to look solutions anywhere else. We're supposed to lead the people, right? We're supposed to be proactive with things, not have a knee-jerk reaction. We have the true moral compass, and we need to lead people towards it. We don't imitate trends, we set the trends. This is why it drives me nuts when I see young people, like, using TikTok or Instagram, and there's trends and they imitate it. It drives me nuts. They inherently become followers, right? Why are you following a trend? This is a defect in personality, to be honest, right? We should not brainlessly follow others. We need to think and reflect. This is where the knowledge aspect comes in, right? The confidence, knowing that you have what is better, right? And we need to start clarifying this to ourselves, to our friends, but more importantly to our children, right? And part of it, obviously, is to really use your logic, right? Is what they're doing beneficial? Is it halal? It's haram? Whatever the case is, we have to think about this, right? Use our logic a little bit. The last one is the sense of feeling that they are, that they're incapable of doing things, right? Where does this come from? Is the fact that they asked Musa to be the one that builds them the idol. Are they incapable of building an idol? They're not incapable of it. But this whole sense of, I can't do anything, right? I am weak, right? That self-sense of defeat. This is something that is detrimental for an individual. They will never progress. And as an ummah, we need to make sure that we don't fall into that same behavior, right? That we don't depend on others to do things for us. We become self-sufficient, right? From the individual, from the family to the later on, because those families are the building blocks. We have to be self-sufficient, right? Like as a community, in Bridgewater, right, of Falah Center, we need to be self-sufficient in every aspect that we can, right? Why not create networks of individuals, professionals, doctors, engineers, that we have a self-sufficient network, that we have everything we need, whether it's teachers, you name it, anything that we need in life, we have that network. Why not set that up, for example? It's just a simple example, right? Why go outside? But of course, there has to come other things along with it, is the fact that we have to make sure that we are trustworthy, that we're honest in our work. Because unfortunately, a lot of times what I hear is Muslims say, I will never deal with another Muslim in business. It's very sad. It is, wallah, it's very sad. Like with our own hands, right, we cause our own destruction. It should not be like that, right? We should be at the highest level of morality and honesty and behavior, that whole network strengthen one another, right? Like building blocks, holding one another, right? That's very important. And so over here, this is something that's important, that we should not act like individuals who can't do anything to depend on others, but instead we need to be self-sufficient. But here's one thing, by the way, about being on the weak side of things. Consumerism, right? If we become a nation or an ummah that just consumes and doesn't produce, that's a weakness. That's a dependency. We're depending on others. We're not being innovative anymore. We're not producing. We're just consuming. Consequently, the ones that supplies us has the strength now. That's it, done. Right? And this is something that we have to understand as individuals, right? We have to being, not to fall into this whole trap of consumerism, right? It's a trick, it's a mental trick. You need this to be happy, you need this to be happy. If you look at how we live our lives, do we need the majority of things that we buy and get? Probably not, right? Probably not, right? This results in several other forms of ailments, attachments to this world, the feeling always comparing, like, materialistic things, the pride, a whole slew of diseases of the heart, right, that associate with it, right? Showing off, arrogance, a lot of things that we fall into that trap, right? Like, people buy things because it's on sale. Well, do you need to buy it? No, but it's on sale. Do you need to buy it? No, but it's on sale. Yeah, Sheikh, why are you buying? That's a waste of money, right? That is consumerism. You fall into that trap. Don't fall into that trap. Of course, if you're going to need it, like if you know you're going to need it in 6 months because, like, school is coming up, whatever the case is, by all means buy it. That's the question. Do I need it? Or will I need it in the short run, immediately? If yes, then get it, right? There's a difference between I need it and I want it. One of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, he said, أَكُلَّمَا اشْتَهَيْتَ اشْتَرَيْتَ. Is it whenever you desire something, you buy it? No, it shouldn't be like that, right? There should be more of a sense of self-control. Yes, alhamdulillah, overall, we live a life that is a lot more relaxed, a lot more, like, financially stable than the past. But it doesn't mean, right, we should indulge in every desire. That's the recipe for a disaster in terms of we no longer have control on our nafs. It's our nafs that's going to start to control us. We no longer control our desire. It's our desire that controls us, right? Well, it's baby steps. Of course, it will lead to those who are from the musrifin, those who are excessive in their spending, right? Wallah. طيب. So Musa alayhi salam, right? He said, غَيْرَ اللَّهِ أَبْغِيكُمْ إِلَهًا وَهُوَ فَضَّلَكُمْ عَلَى الْعَالَمِينَ. Is it other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that desire for you as a God, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has preferred you over the worlds. And so when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses us with something, we have to be careful that we deal with it and reciprocate in the best way possible, to submission and gratitude and so forth. Now, these 5 things, by the way, our share, if we have all of them, then essentially the greater the disaster is, put it that way, right? Perhaps the further we will fall, right? If we have 1, yes, we're moving away. 2, we're moving further. But any group of people that have all these 5 together, right? This is a nation that is doomed, right? And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to purify us from these things, to allow us to learn from these things. Ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to enable us to learn from these passages of the Quran and rather implement what the Prophet ﷺ had practiced and taught to become among the best generation, inshallah. طيب, I think I'm going to stop here. I actually intended to I was hoping I can go into the miqat, or the time where Musa alayhi salam had met Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Turi Sinai. But we'll stop here because I don't want to go for an hour, right? We've been for like 40 minutes, 43 minutes. That's good for enough today, inshallah. There's chai, ya Sheikh, or no chai? There's chai today? طيب. Real chai? طيب. We have real chai today. جزاكم الله خير. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. جزاكم الله خير. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله.